Looking back, I can still recall the precise moment when everything changed. When our family, once united by laughter and shared memories, descended into a chaotic war zone of pranks, hurt, and bitter rivalries. It all began with an engagement dinner that was meant to be a celebration of love and new beginnings. My oldest brother, Ethan, had just announced his engagement to Ashley during our traditional Sunday dinner, a moment filled with pride and anticipation. The table buzzed with congratulatory chatter, and glasses clinked in celebration of the future he envisioned. But as with many things in our family, the joyful moment was tainted by mischief. Ethan had always been the golden child, meticulous, dedicated, and revered by most for his unwavering pursuit of perfection. His proposal to Ashley had been the highlight of the evening, a carefully rehearsed speech that he delivered with passion and poise. The air was filled with hope and expectation when he finally revealed his plans to marry the woman he loved. However, no sooner had he finished his speech than our middle brother, Jake, seized his chance to puncture the solemnity of the moment. Jake, ever the provocateur, immediately launched into a mocking imitation of Ethan's speech. His tone was laced with sarcasm as he ridiculed every carefully chosen word, eliciting a round of nervous laughter from the family. Although we all pretended that it was nothing more than typical sibling banter, Ethan's eyes told a different story. There was a flash of hurt there, a promise of retribution that would soon come to fruition. The seeds of discord had been planted that very day, but nothing could have prepared us for the magnitude of what was about to unfold. In the days following that dinner, Ethan busied himself with organizing a formal engagement dinner intended to impress Ashley's parents. At the center of his elaborate plans was a massive, beautifully decorated homemade cake, a symbol of his dedication and a testament to his desire to make everything perfect. Proudly, he insisted on baking the cake himself, believing that his efforts would convey his sincerity and commitment. Jake, ever eager to insert himself into the proceedings, volunteered to help in the kitchen. In hindsight, his offer should have been an immediate red flag, but Ethan, caught up in the glow of his impending nuptials, accepted without hesitation. Unbeknownst to anyone else in the house, on the night before the dinner, Jake slipped into the kitchen after everyone had gone to bed. His mind was set on pulling off what he thought would be a harmless prank, a playful jab at Ethan's overbearing quest for perfection. With a smirk, Jake replaced the sugar canister with salt, convinced that a little mischief was exactly what their family needed. The next day, the engagement dinner unfolded with all the pomp and circumstance Ethan had meticulously arranged. The dining room was filled with guests, including Ashley's parents, who watched with keen interest as Ethan presented his culinary masterpiece. The cake was the centerpiece of the evening, a towering confection adorned with delicate icing and festive decorations. Ethan, with a flourish, cut a generous slice and proudly handed it to Ashley's father, expecting nothing short of admiration. But as soon as the first bite was taken, the atmosphere shifted. Ashley's father's face contorted in horror. His eyes widened as the taste of salt overwhelmed his senses. The reaction was instantaneous. He reached desperately for water, his expression morphing from polite surprise to utter disgust. Ethan, mortified and confused, quickly tasted the cake himself. In that moment, as the realization dawned on him, his heart sank. It was immediately clear that the cake had been sabotaged. In front of a stunned audience, Ethan's voice rang out, a cry that was both a declaration and a demand for accountability. "Jake!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the now silenced dining room. That single word, laden with betrayal and frustration, marked the point of no return. In that split second, our family's carefully balanced dynamic shattered. What had once been a playful rivalry erupted into an all-out battle of egos and wounded pride. The fallout was swift and brutal. Ethan, seething with anger, decided that words alone would not suffice for his revenge. He knew Jake's one glaring vulnerability: his intense sensitivity about his public image and reputation among our extended circle of friends and colleagues. Deep in the recesses of our family history lay a relic of embarrassment, a long-forgotten video from our cousin's wedding where Jake, clearly intoxicated and overly enthusiastic, performed a disastrously off-key rendition of "I Will Always Love You." The video was a source of perpetual ridicule, though it had long been tucked away and forgotten by most. Fueled by the sting of the salted cake incident, Ethan unearthed that video, edited it with a few snarky captions, and then, with calculated precision, posted it on Facebook. His caption was simple yet devastating: "Dedicated to my dear brother Jake, the Salt King. In mere hours, the video exploded across our small suburban community. Friends, co-workers, and even ex-girlfriends flooded Jake's phone with mocking messages and screenshots. Overnight, Jake became the unwilling star of a viral sensation. A living, breathing punchline that undermined his dignity and self-respect. The retaliation that ensued was as swift as it was explosive. Jake, reeling from the public humiliation, stormed into Ethan's room later that night, his fists clenched and his face burning with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. In a volatile confrontation, Ethan, unruffled and calm as if he were simply stating a fact, told Jake that every action had its consequences. He insisted that the video would only be removed if Jake offered a public apology, a concession that, for someone like Jake, was inconceivable. Yet, even as the two of them clashed verbally in that tense moment, it was clear that what had begun as a mischievous prank was evolving into something far more dangerous. A raw, open confrontation that tapped into years of suppressed resentment. The pranks, which might have been laughable in another context, now exposed deeper fissures in our family. Beneath the surface of these petty battles lay a history of unspoken grudges, rivalry, and emotional neglect. I remember that night vividly. The tension in our home was palpable. Every room seemed charged with a mix of laughter and underlying sorrow, as if our collective amusement was merely a cover for the real pain we all felt. What started with a sabotaged cake and a viral video had ignited a conflict that threatened to tear us apart. That evening, as voices rose and accusations flew, it became unmistakably clear that our family was no longer the cohesive unit we once believed it to be. Instead, we were divided by a war of pranks and petty revenge, a battle that was about much more than a salted dessert. In that chaotic moment, as Ethan's angry declaration and Jake's bitter retort filled the room, I found myself grappling with a profound realization. Sometimes the smallest acts of mischief can expose the deepest wounds. Our siblings' rivalry, once dismissed as harmless fun, had become a mirror reflecting years of unspoken frustrations and unmet expectations. And as the echoes of that night's conflict reverberated through our family, it was clear that nothing would ever be the same again. This was the spark that set off a chain reaction, a series of retaliations and escalating pranks that would continue to redefine our relationships in the months and years that followed. Little did we know that the salted cake would be remembered not just as a moment of culinary sabotage, but as the catalyst for a family confrontation that forced us all to face the realities of our hidden resentments. In the wake of that fateful engagement dinner, the stage was set for an all-out war of humor, humiliation, and ultimately, a reckoning that none of us could have foreseen. And so, as I sit here reflecting on those turbulent days, I realize that the pain of that moment was the turning point. A moment when our family was forced to confront the truth behind our playful banter. The feud that erupted between Ethan and Jake was not merely a series of isolated pranks. It was the culmination of years of unresolved tension, a battle that would eventually lead to unexpected reconciliation and growth. But that, I suppose, is a story for another time. For now, the salted cake stands as a bitter, unforgettable reminder that sometimes, even the simplest act of mischief can ignite a war, and that in the chaos of family life, the line between humor and hurt is all too easily blurred. In the aftermath of that fateful engagement dinner, our family home was shrouded in an uneasy silence that spoke louder than any words ever could. The salted cake debacle had left scars that were as fresh as they were raw. Ethan's shout of "Jake" had echoed in every corner of our lives, and the viral video, snidely captioned, "Dedicated to my dear brother Jake, the Salt King," had transformed a private humiliation into a public spectacle. For days, the house felt charged with tension, each of us caught in the crossfire of our siblings' burgeoning war. Jake's reaction to the video was immediate and explosive. That night, after the flood of mocking messages had subsided, he stormed into Ethan's room. I remember the intensity in his eyes, a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and wounded pride. His fists clenched as he ranted about how Ethan had taken a childish prank and turned it into a weapon. Ethan, unruffled and surprisingly calm, stood his ground. He simply reiterated that every prank, every careless act, had consequences, and that humiliation in the digital age was a cost Jake would have to pay. In that charged moment, Ethan made it clear, the video would only disappear if Jake publicly apologized, a condition that seemed impossible given Jake's stubborn nature. That confrontation marked the point at which their rivalry truly escalated. It wasn't long before Jake, seething with indignation, decided that if Ethan was so quick to expose his embarrassing moments, then perhaps he could turn the tables in a way that would be equally unforgettable. And so, his next move was born out of an acute awareness of Ethan's own vulnerabilities. Known for his fastidious care of his prized luxury car, Ethan had developed a routine. Every Sunday morning, he would meticulously detail his car, ensuring every surface sparkled with perfection. Jake, never one to let an opportunity slip, hatched a plan that was as devious as it was symbolic. Late one Sunday night, under the cloak of darkness, Jake crept to Ethan's garage. With a smirk that belied the seriousness of his intent, he unscrewed the cap of the windshield washer fluid reservoir and, with careful precision, replaced the clear fluid with neon green food coloring. Jake chuckled to himself, imagining the shock on Ethan's face when, the next morning, his pristine car would be marred by a cascade of fluorescent green streaks splashed across the windshield and even smeared on the pavement as he drove by. Monday morning came, and as fate would have it, Ethan's routine remained unaltered. He pulled out of the driveway, his mind still on the remnants of last night's confrontation. In an instant, the green fluid shot from his washer, transforming his windshield into a canvas of electric hues. The effect was surreal. Pedestrians stopped in their tracks, and even a few onlookers couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of the scene. Social media lit up with images and comments, and before long, Ethan was labeled the Green Window Guy by everyone in our neighborhood. The ridicule stung deeply, striking at the core of Ethan's pride. That afternoon, he returned home in a fury, his eyes red with anger and humiliation. I could sense that this incident had pushed him to a breaking point. A moment where the playful sibling rivalry was no longer just a series of pranks but a bitter contest of wounded egos. The tension in the house was palpable. Family members tiptoed around conversations, trying to avoid triggering another confrontation between the two brothers. That evening, as the sunset cast long shadows over our home, Ethan's pent-up emotions finally erupted. He burst into the living room, slamming the door behind him with such force that even our normally talkative grandmother fell silent. His voice was tight with anger as he began to recount every humiliation he'd endured over the past few weeks, from the salted cake and the viral video to the neon green windshield catastrophe. Each word was laced with raw emotion as he described the sting of public shame and the deep-seated sense of betrayal that had been festering inside him for far too long. Jake, already on edge from the previous night's events, rose to his feet as soon as Ethan's tirade began. Arms crossed and eyes defiant, he prepared to meet his brother's onslaught head-on. But what followed was unexpected. As Ethan's voice grew louder, he started dredging up painful memories from our childhood. Moments when their rivalry had taken a darker turn, when each prank and careless remark had been a silent vote against one another. Ethan's anger transformed into a torrent of accusations. "You've never cared about anyone but yourself," he cried. "You ruined my engagement dinner because you couldn't stand the idea of someone else shining in the spotlight. You sabotage everything because you're terrified you'll never measure up." The words hung in the air, heavy and condemning. For a long, agonizing moment, time seemed to stand still. Jake's face, usually a mask of carefree humor, crumpled into a look of profound hurt. His defiant stance faltered, and in a voice barely above a whisper, he mumbled a genuine apology, something I had never heard him do before. But the damage was done. Ethan, overwhelmed by the surge of emotions, stormed out of the house, leaving Jake standing in the silent, shattered aftermath. In the following days, the effects of that explosive confrontation rippled through our family like a shockwave. Ethan withdrew into himself, avoiding family gatherings and even evading conversations with our parents. Jake, meanwhile, sank into a sullen quietness, his usual wit replaced by a reflective sadness that seemed to age him overnight. The prank war had evolved from light-hearted sibling rivalry into something far more serious, a chasm of hurt and unspoken regrets that threatened to sever the bond that had once held them together. I spent hours watching the two of them from a distance, each consumed by their own turmoil. Our parents tried to mediate, offering platitudes that felt hollow against the depth of their conflict. The once familiar laughter that used to echo through our home was replaced by strained silences and hesitant glances. It was as if every prank, every embarrassing video, had chipped away at the foundation of our brotherhood, leaving behind a rift that seemed impossible to mend. And yet, amid the chaos, there were fleeting moments of reflection, A subtle, almost imperceptible acknowledgement that beneath all the mockery and humiliation lay a deep-seated love that had not been entirely extinguished. I recall one quiet afternoon when Jake, sitting alone in the backyard, stared out at the fading light. His eyes, usually so full of mischief, now carried a heavy sadness, a realization of how far things had spiraled out of control. It was in that moment that I understood the true tragedy of their feud, that pride and the need for public validation had blinded them to the inherent bond of brotherhood. That week, our family's routine became a series of awkward, almost unbearable silences punctuated by forced smiles at gatherings. Each member of our clan seemed to be tiptoeing around the painful subject, unwilling to confront the underlying issues that had fueled the feud. And though the pranks had subsided for a time, the unresolved tension continued to simmer beneath the surface, threatening to erupt at any moment. As the days turned into a tense, unspoken standoff, it became clear that neither Ethan nor Jake was willing to make the first move toward reconciliation. Their pride, each wounded in their own way, kept them locked in a bitter stalemate, a war of silence that left our family in a perpetual state of uncertainty and sorrow. In this uneasy environment, I found myself reflecting on the nature of sibling rivalry and the ways in which minor pranks can sometimes serve as a cover for deeper wounds. The salted cake had been more than just a joke. It had been a manifestation of years of pent-up frustration, a symbolic act that exposed the vulnerabilities hidden behind our familial facade. And while the initial laughter and light-hearted teasing had given way to public humiliation and intense personal pain, it also forced each of us to confront uncomfortable truths about our relationships with one another. In the midst of this escalating drama, I began to wonder whether the relentless cycle of pranks and counterpranks would ever lead to genuine healing, or if it would only drive an irreparable wedge between Ethan and Jake. The stakes had grown so high that even our family's cherished traditions seemed tainted by the bitterness of their conflict. The very events that were meant to celebrate milestones, engagements, weddings, and family dinners, had become arenas for a war that none of us had truly wanted. By the end of this tumultuous week, it was evident that our family stood at a crossroads. The path forward was uncertain, and the lingering question remained. Could love and understanding eventually prevail over the bruised egos and wounded pride that had defined these recent events? The escalation of their feud had unmasked a profound vulnerability within both brothers, a vulnerability that, if left unaddressed, threatened not only their relationship but the very fabric of our family. As I closed another day marked by tense silences and unspoken regrets, I couldn't help but wonder how we would eventually find our way back to each other. The pranks had escalated far beyond harmless sibling antics. They had become a mirror reflecting our deepest insecurities and unfulfilled needs for acceptance and validation. And while the fallout was painful and the wounds were still fresh, I held onto a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, the next chapter in our story would be one of reconciliation and healing. A future where the salt and the neon green could one day be replaced by genuine laughter and a renewed bond between brothers. In the weeks following that fateful confrontation, our family seemed to drift into a state of suspended animation, a tense quiet that echoed in every corner of our home. The explosive battle between Ethan and Jake had left deep scars. Their words, raw and unfiltered, had exposed years of hidden resentments. Yet amid the lingering bitterness and awkward silences, a fragile hope began to emerge. It was as if, beneath the rubble of hurt pride and public humiliation, a seed of reconciliation had been planted. A seed that, if nurtured, might one day bloom into something beautiful. For days, Ethan remained distant. He skipped family dinners, avoided our parents' attempts at mediation, and even refused to speak to Jake. Jake, on the other hand, sank into an uncharacteristic gloom. His usual mischievous smile was replaced by a pained introspection that made him seem older than his years. I spent long hours wondering if our family would ever recover from the chaos unleashed by a salted cake and a viral video. The festive occasions we once cherished had been tarnished by our unspoken rivalry, and every gathering became a minefield of what-ifs and could-have-beens. Then, unexpectedly, a turning point arrived on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. The doorbell rang at our family home, breaking the oppressive silence that had settled over us. Standing on the porch was Ashley, Ethan's fiancée, clutching a small, familiar box. Her eyes, full of gentle determination, met Jake's as she stepped inside. In that quiet moment, her presence seemed to signal a bridge across the chasm that had split our family apart. With soft, measured words, Ashley explained that while Jake's pranks had hurt, she believed they were born not of malice but of insecurity, a misguided attempt to mask his own vulnerabilities. She admitted that Ethan's relentless pursuit of perfection had also contributed to the growing rift between them, leaving both brothers wounded and isolated. Her words struck a chord with Jake. For the first time since the feud had erupted, I saw his eyes glisten with remorse. In a trembling voice, he confessed that beneath the surface of his playful jibes, he had always admired Ethan's discipline, his commitment, and the warmth he brought to every family gathering. Jake admitted that he had never intended to cause such deep pain. He had only sought to remind Ethan not to take himself too seriously, a lesson he now realized had been lost in the chaos of their escalating rivalry. Inspired by Ashley's empathy and her quiet plea for healing, the two of them hatched a daring plan to mend the fractured bond between them. They decided to organize a surprise family barbecue, a casual, intimate gathering designed to draw Ethan out of his self-imposed exile and remind him of the simple pleasures of togetherness. The plan was ingenious in its simplicity. Ashley would coax Ethan into attending under the guise of discussing wedding details, while Jake, determined to set aside his pride, would work tirelessly behind the scenes to create an atmosphere that reflected everything Ethan had always loved about our family. Over the next few days, I watched as Jake transformed our backyard into a heartfelt tribute to the bonds of brotherhood. He carefully arranged the patio furniture, hung strings of warm, glowing lights, and set up a barbecue station featuring Ethan's favorite grilled burgers and sides. Every detail was a silent apology, a message that no matter the hurt or the pranks, the love between siblings was worth preserving. Even the old photo albums were dusted off and strategically placed on a small table, inviting us all to reminisce about happier times. On the day of the barbecue, the sky was painted in soft hues of late afternoon light. Family members began arriving one by one, their tentative smiles and hushed greetings betraying the lingering tension. I sensed that everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see if this carefully orchestrated event could truly mend what had been broken. At last, as the clock neared the agreed-upon time, Ethan arrived. He hesitated at the gate, his eyes scanning the familiar yet transformed scene before him, a scene that seemed to pulse with an unspoken promise of reconciliation. Jake, standing near the grill with a look of earnest contrition, stepped forward. Tentatively, he extended his hand, a silent gesture of peace. For a long, tense moment, Ethan regarded him. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, he reached out and accepted the handshake. That small act, simple yet profound, set in motion a series of events that would ultimately heal the wounds of the past. As the barbecue unfolded, the atmosphere began to shift. The awkward silence that had haunted our gatherings was gradually replaced by genuine laughter and heartfelt conversation. Relatives shared stories of childhood mischief and recalled moments when the brothers had been inseparable. Slowly, the tension that had once seemed impenetrable began to melt away, replaced by a cautious but real sense of togetherness. I watched, moved by the sight, as Ethan and Jake moved closer together. There were no grand speeches or dramatic declarations, only small, genuine gestures. At one point, Ethan walked over to the table where Jake had set out a tray of freshly grilled burgers. He picked one up and with a small smile said, "These are just like you used to make them." Jake's eyes shone with gratitude and relief. He returned the smile with one of his own, softer and more sincere than I had ever seen before. That evening, as twilight deepened and the soft glow of the fairy lights cast a warm luminescence over the gathering, the brothers found themselves side by side near the fire pit. They spoke quietly, words that carried the weight of shared history, apologies, and the tentative promise of a future free from the bitterness of rivalry. Their conversation wasn't about pranks or past humiliations. It was about memories of simpler times and the hope of reclaiming a bond that had always been there, hidden beneath layers of hurt pride. By the end of the night, a transformation had taken place that none of us had dared to hope for. The great feud, born from a salted cake and amplified by viral videos and neon green pranks, had given way to a fragile but genuine reconciliation. Our family, battered by conflict, was beginning to heal. In that healing, we discovered that even the most painful betrayals could serve as catalysts for growth. A reminder that beneath the humor and chaos lay a deep, abiding love that no prank or insult could ever truly erase. In the days that followed, the memory of that barbecue became a turning point in our family's story. At Ethan and Ashley's wedding, for instance, Jake proudly stood as Ethan's best man. His speech, filled with humorous anecdotes and genuine heartfelt reflections, recounted the absurdity of their past conflicts with a tenderness that moved everyone. He joked about the infamous cake, the viral karaoke video, and the neon green windshield disaster, but his tone was now one of reconciliation rather than ridicule. In his concluding words, Jake reminded us all that the imperfections and misadventures of our lives were what made our family uniquely strong, and that true forgiveness was the key to moving forward. As Ethan embraced Jake after the speech, sealing their newfound bond with a heartfelt hug, I realized that our family had, in its own chaotic way, come full circle. The pranks that had once seemed so destructive had ultimately forced us all to confront the unspoken pain and jealousy that had festered beneath the surface. And in that painful process, we had learned that love, understanding, and a willingness to forgive could bridge even the widest gaps. Looking back now, I can see that the journey from rivalry to reconciliation was not a neat, linear process. There were setbacks and moments when it seemed as though the wounds would never heal. But in the end, the feud that began with a salted cake had become the catalyst for a profound transformation. A transformation that redefined our family, uniting us in a way that was richer, deeper, and far more authentic than before. As our family gathers today, whether for holiday dinners or casual reunions, the story of Ethan and Jake's feud is retold with laughter and warmth. It serves as a testament to the fact that even the most bitter conflicts can, with time and sincere effort, yield a legacy of love and unity. And though the scars remain, a reminder of the pain we once endured, they are now overshadowed by the bonds of forgiveness and the enduring strength of our shared history. In that final quiet moment by the fire pit, as the stars began to pepper the night sky, I understood that what truly matters in life is not perfection or the absence of conflict, but the courage to come together, to face our flaws, and to choose love over pride. And that, ultimately, is the new beginning our family embraced. A beginning built not on the foundation of old rivalries, but on the promise of a future where every shared laugh and every forgiven mistake brings us closer together. That's it for today's story. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more wild Reddit stories. Until next time, stay curious and keep the stories coming.